Hello and welcome back to to our second episode of our second season. So Tori,
Yes.
what are we talking about today?
We are talking about in-laws.
In-laws. Fun.
Yeah. Before this, we were just talking about like our previous clients
Mhm.
and how this is a common topic, like managing family dynamics and
Yeah.
like all throughout the year, right? Like I think people talk about it maybe more so during the holidays because
Yeah, I could see that.
like that's when family gatherings are happening, but I think it happens all year in
Mhm.
different ways, right? So
Yeah, and I think it's something that is talked about, but maybe is more easily brushed aside for a lot of people. They don't think,
yeah.
oh, it's going to affect them as much.
Yeah.
Um, And then of course I was showing you the extreme
Oh my
versions of
gosh.
in-laws.
Yes.
Um
Some crazy stuff.
but I mean, the extreme versions aside, I
Yeah,
think it really does come down to, communication
of
and
course.
being that, like you were saying, kind of being a partnership, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I mean that's what?
Nothing. No, I'm just thinking as you're
Ah,
speaking. I'm not being a good listener. I'm
no,
thinking about
you're thinking
okay.
about what you're just gonna okay.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's a very tricky topic because
Yeah.
families are really important to
Mhm.
people a lot of the time. And so some people even feel like you're having to pick, right? Like, do I
Yeah.
pick my family of origin, like my mom and dad, or am I picking this new partner that I have? And
Mhm.
maybe they're not even new, like maybe you've been married for 10 years or something.
Yeah.
But that needs to be your new core, right? And it's
Mhm.
not saying like you have to be mean to your family of origin or
No.
like exclude them or treat them poorly, which I think people initially think of that. Like, if I'm
Yeah.
choosing my partner, that means I'm not choosing them and like my family of origin. That doesn't feel good. So,
Mhm.
how do I manage this? How do I mitigate this? And I think like I've seen it in my clients before, and I imagine you have too. And
Yeah.
it's hard. It's hard
Mhm.
to um, kind of make sure everyone's needs are taken care of. And that can be in a really hard place for people, right?
Mhm.
People can feel torn in different directions.
Yeah, I would also add that I think because you have to kind of take into account that if the family member, the in-law that you're dealing with is maybe emotionally immature or
Mm,
there's maybe some
mental health?
mental health issues going on,
Yeah.
it can make it really difficult to know where to put that line down. And that's again where communication comes in and is super important because if you're not on the same page as a couple, um, or even just, what do you need to protect yourself? Because I've had couples where
Yeah.
um the in-laws was kind of the big issue and they would they just kind of as a couple came to the agreement that she would not go over to family events,
That
that
was like
was
a
her, yeah,
boundary,
that was her boundary, that she wasn't going to go over there, that he was more than able to go and have a relationship with his family,
but
but
she was like, not
she,
for
yeah,
me.
and there was a lot that led up to that wasn't an easy decision for them, but I think that that was probably the best decision for them as a couple
Mhm.
because it allowed for her to keep what she needed just as important as what they needed as a couple.
Yeah. No, I think that's awesome if like both halves of the couple can come from a place of understanding. I mean, we
Mhm.
talk about this all the time. Understanding comes first, of
Yeah.
course, like before any kind of problem solving or
Yeah.
compromising, right? But I think like that's where people probably initially go awry in their conversations is one or both parties don't feel heard. Like I
Yeah.
would say this is the
Mhm.
number one issue in my clients that I see is they don't feel understood, they don't feel heard, they don't feel seen, and that makes
Mhm.
it near impossible to create boundaries that are mutually respectful and like work for both parties.
Yeah. So I know we were mentioning the extreme versions,
Yes, yes,
which is probably my favorite.
yes. Cassandra was showing me videos.
I was mainly from I'm in love with a mama's boy,
And is
which
it a
is
TV
just
show?
it is a TV show. It surrounds mama's boys. And yeah, it's super interesting. If you are interested in that sort of reality TV, go for it.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But I think it's a needed portion because even though it's probably exaggerated, and I'm sure they're telling them to, up it a
Oh,
bit.
probably for good
I
TV.
Yeah, yeah. I do think it's good that it's shown because again, I've had a couple of clients who just individually were felt like they couldn't talk about what was bothering them with the in-law, or felt like,
Mm.
oh, I'm just being dramatic, or I'm just, like kind of sort of putting themselves down in order to just sort of keep the peace.
Oh, I see that a lot too. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't want to upset my partner, so I'm just not going to say anything.
Mhm.
And I know how important that is, right? That relationship. So I'm just
Yeah.
not gonna say anything.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think families are hard.
They're very hard.
Right? And there's so many things that go into it, like we were saying with the mental health,
That's what I was just
the
thinking about
emotional
too.
immaturity.
Yeah, because that clip that you showed me, the
Mhm.
mother just didn't seem to get it,
No,
right? The
mm-mm.
mother-in-law. So like that's the one we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like maybe even a boundary is created between the couple and it's communicated to the in-law, but then the
Right.
in-law maybe thinks they know best, right? Like I'm
Mhm.
your parent, so therefore
Yeah.
I trump you, right? Like
Mhm.
I know what's best. And that's not always the case. And it's extremely disrespectful. But I think, that really blends into people, oh, what's the word I was gonna say? Like people who are like
Emotional.
well, sure, yeah, but I was just thinking like like they're disrespectful, they're thinking like their way is better.
Mhm.
And it's yeah, I forget the word I'm trying to find right now. That's
Okay.
fine.
It'll come back to
It
me.
will, it definitely will. But it's not nice.
No.
It's
Mhm.
really harmful. Like, well, I think they still see them as a kid. I think that's what I'm
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
Is
Eh,
like
they're
that
infantilized.
yeah,
Mhm.
that control, that looking down on them.
Mhm.
They
Yeah.
they don't think they know
Well,
better.
yeah, and when I've like kind of researched a little bit into um like especially specifically mothers, like mother-in-laws, I guess,
Mm,
and how if there's a level of enmeshment between the son and the mother, when this new partner comes in, it's the mother views it as competition.
mm.
And
Oh
so
yeah. I was just thinking about that.
yeah, so it's like because this mother-in-law is usually getting her emotional needs met by this child, or well, adult child.
Ooh.
And so that dynamic has been in place probably since this, usually a guy, has been able to sit there and listen to mom. Right.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of comes down to the types of people that are, one, again, emotional immaturity, I'll say it till I'm blue in the face.
Mm.
But also just they don't know how to communicate that with their partner, that like, this is what I need some emotional support, so they sort of swivel to their child, and they use their child as a way of getting those emotional needs met.
And then what happens when they have a partner?
Right. And then it's suddenly competition. It's suddenly, you're taking my son away from me. You're ruining this relationship.
Their needs are going unmet now.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
It doesn't matter what the person is. It could be
Mhm.
anybody.
Yeah. It could be a perfectly, wonderful human being that's coming
Absolutely.
into the
Yeah.
family. But yeah, I think it's such an interesting kind of dynamic that happens occasionally, where seems to start off with just a very emotionally immature, kind of emotionally starved person who
And
has
we're talking about the in-law themselves.
Yes.
That's the problem.
Yeah. They are so emotionally starved, or like affection starved almost.
Yeah.
And so
Or they're reliant on someone else to get their
Yes,
needs met,
yes,
right? They're
yep.
reliant on their child or that relationship.
Yeah, and so it's such an enmeshed relationship that even the adult child sometimes feels guilty for, putting their needs first or putting their partner first, because they're going, well, but I've always been there for mom. I've always taken care of mom. Or even just the vocabulary we sometimes use with kids, where we're like, oh, not, hopefully not so much anymore, but in past, I've heard people say to like their young men, like, oh, well, you're the man of the house now. You know what I mean? Like this dynamic of you're responsible for this. So that also means you're stepping into dad's role almost
Mm,
in an emotional sense.
yep,
Um,
yep.
so yeah, it's it's kind of an interesting dynamic that happens. I don't know how often it really happens. I'm hoping not a lot, but I have come across a fair amount of people where there's definitely some emotional, technically it's termed emotional incest.
Oh my God, I've
Yeah.
never heard of this.
Yes.
It
So
sounds really
it sounds
icky.
very icky. I've had a couple clients in past who they definitely there was
Wow.
emotional incest going on basically.
Oh my
And
goodness.
it's nothing sexual,
No, of course
but
not.
it's just that there's one parent who they have developed a relationship with their child that is so like out of sync, right? Where it's so much like, oh, you're basically my partner. Like I've in a lot of
You're getting a lot of needs
yes.
met as if a
Yes.
partner would.
Yeah.
And I think like maybe even historically women live longer than men. And so maybe this in-law, if we're talking about mother-in-law, maybe her partner, her husband has, if they're in a heterosexual relationship, has
Sure.
passed on. And now
Mhm.
they're looking to get their needs met from their adult son.
Yeah. And from what I've kind of looked into, that's actually when it sort of becomes worse. When that sort of
Because they're not getting their needs met from their partner
yes.
at
So
all now.
usually it's like this is so not only is it I'm relying on you for my emotional needs in a way that your father gave me, which I know
Right.
sounds icky, but
We're talking about some Freudian
I
stuff
know,
here.
we're getting weird now. Getting weird. But also, sometimes these mothers will then look at their children as like, oh, this is the last piece I have of my partner.
Oh my gosh.
Right? Yeah. So it's
Wow.
like even more like I want to insulate you. I want you to
Protect
never
you,
go
hold you
anywhere.
close.
Yeah. So it's not only, especially if the child happens to look like their partner that's died, like that can be really bad. Well, not that they can do
Wow.
much about that, but
This is so interesting.
yeah. And so it's just a really interesting thing. And usually if the mother-in-law is married, usually it's and they turn to their child for emotional everything.
Yeah.
It's because they're not getting that with their partner. Like the other partner is usually very disconnected, very checked out of the marriage. And so they're turning to their children
As if they weren't there at all.
yeah. Or I've also seen it where if a parent goes into having a child and they've basically given the child a role, right? Like, oh, this child is always going to love me. They're always going to do this. You know what I mean? That sort of element.
They've created this narrative.
Yeah. And so that puts this sort of pressure on the child. And then as they become an adult, it's, well, I have to take care of mom. And then we add in, the cultural thing like you were talking about.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure you said it from a cultural perspective. I've seen it from like a religious perspective. Especially in certain
I think more Eastern cultures, like more like collectivist cultures,
yeah.
where a lot of times like in-laws are even living with the new couple, and that makes it very challenging for the other, right? Not the son or the daughter of the parents, but the other person.
Yeah.
It's interesting because like as I'm thinking about this and rewriting the tape in my mind of like people I've worked with, it typically is the daughter-in-law that's having the issues.
Yeah.
It's not typically like a son-in-law that's having issues, but now I say it out loud, I have seen that too, where like his in-laws are living with him, maybe because the in-laws are elderly or they can't care for themselves, or housing costs right now, we're in a housing crisis, like it's cheaper, people are adapting their homes to have like in-law suites and things like that. But it can be intrusive on the couple, right? Like in terms of private time, but even like just downtime, right? Like quality time, one-on-one time like that. Especially too if there's like shared kitchens, like shared meals, like a lot of times that's how people come together at the end of the day to like decompress about the day. And so it can be really challenging to, like you said earlier, to like say I actually don't really like this, like to your
Mhm.
partner who has the parents living there because they're their parents, right? And
Right.
hopefully they have a good relationship and really love their parents, but you don't want to make people choose. You don't want to give people ultimatums.
Mhm.
You don't want to make people feel badly. But if
Yeah,
you don't talk about it, then it builds resentment, right? And then
sure.
you may end up having these negative feelings towards your in-laws where like they didn't do anything wrong actually. It's just the fact that they're there.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I think that's a good point. But yeah, I think it's interesting that you've seen it more culturally, and I would say that I've seen that a little more since working.
We're very
Um,
multicultural here.
yeah. But I would say previous to for me, it was seeing it more from a religious perspective of where, especially a more like conservative family, where it's the
Oh, the gender roles.
gender roles are very strict, and it's like you should do this, and then if the mother-in-law comes in and is like, well,
That's
you're
not how
not
you do
do
it.
yeah, yeah, that's not how you do it, that's not how you raise the kids, that's,
Mm,
those sorts of things. And then if the husband or wife, I don't think it matters, but comes in and doesn't do anything, sides with the in-laws, or tells their partner, you're being over dramatic,
oh
or
dear.
yeah. But one thing I usually like to tell clients is um that you are both in charge of your own families for the most part. So if
Like
there's
managing
yeah,
the
yeah.
dynamics.
So if you have if your wife has a problem with your mother-in-law because of something the mother-in-law has done or said or whatever, it is the husband's or partner, whoever the other partner.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't talk today. The other partner's job to go and talk and sort of say like, hey, this is not appropriate.
Right.
We don't, especially if it's a toxic environment, I think it's even more important for the other partner to really advocate and go, look, this is my partner. I This is not okay to treat them like
Yeah. I
this.
don't like what I'm
Yeah,
seeing. It's not
right.
helping. It's actually hurting
Yes,
them.
because I think under normal circumstances, yes, partner A could go in and talk to the mother-in-law or father-in-law if they have good communication. But if it's a toxic environment, you're just
Yeah.
basically sending them in to be gaslit and, just dismissed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So usually if there's a lot of resentment or a lot of other issues going on, I'll say like just they're your parents, you handle your parents.
No, I think that's a good idea. Like, because they have the relationship,
Yeah,
right? Whereas
yeah,
the outsider, the partner doesn't have that. I mean, that sounds kind of fair to me,
yeah.
right? Yeah. Oh,
I have noticed that when I do say that, usually the partner that feels like they have to go and talk to the in-law feels relief, because it's like, okay, because a lot of times they would have already tried to go and talk on their own,
mm.
right? They would have tried to resolve it and it's not working. And so that's when the other partner needs to go in and go, okay, mom, dad, like this isn't okay. You can't
Mhm.
treat so and so like this. If you continue to do this, this is what is going to happen.
And not from like a threatening place, but just from like
No.
a sense of urgency. Like my partner's really important to me and like how they feel and like I want us all to get along and have
Sure.
like family gatherings and stuff.
Yeah.
This is just how it makes us feel. And I think
Yeah.
like this is a new generation where like maybe therapy is less stigmatized, mental health is less
Mhm.
stigmatized, setting like really effective boundaries is encouraged and
Yeah.
like not seen as a negative thing. And so I think there's more of that, which is amazing, but I still think the older generation may not totally understand that. And like maybe in some ways would be envious that they didn't do that with their in-laws,
Yeah.
right? Like, because we were kind of talking about this too earlier about how like people are like intergenerational kind of like trauma in that like okay I was treated this way and so now I'm going to treat you this way
Mhm.
because like now I'm the mother-in-law. I was the daughter-in-law before but now I'm like this and this is how I get to be now.
Yeah.
These are the defined roles. So it can be very unclear and it can be very unsettling and people don't know what's what and it does get quite complicated.
Yeah. Again, families can be messy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every family's different too, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
we're talking about in-laws right now, and maybe this would be good for a next episode, but just talking about like stepkids and like
Yeah.
blended families
yeah.
and how that is a challenge,
Mhm.
right? Or it can be, right? I mean, it doesn't have to
Yeah.
be, but it often can be. And I think right now too, that is very, very common to have divorce rate being what it is, and
Yeah.
people divorcing young as well. There's still lots of life to live, and
Yeah.
people want to find love again, and hopefully they do if that's what they want. And a lot of times that comes with the kids of the other, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's an interesting area.
It is totally. And I think we see it all the time, like working with couples, right? These are the type of
Yeah.
topics that come up. Parents, aging parents, kids,
Mhm.
household stuff, money, like these are the main
The big
topics.
ones, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. No, I think this is good. I think we could talk about this forever, and hopefully it resonates with some of you what we're talking about. And I mean, for the most part, everyone has in-laws,
True, true.
people who are in a relationship, right? I mean, I don't have in-laws, like I don't, my partner's parents are deceased, so I don't have that typical in-law relationship, but he does have kids, so
Sure.
that's something
Yeah, that's a
that
new dynamic for you.
that's
Yeah.
different.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
never thought of that, right? I never thought, oh, I wouldn't have in-laws. And some people would say, well, you're darn lucky you don't have in-laws because you know what I gotta deal with. And I say, well, I don't know if it's any
Yeah.
better than what I'm dealing with, but
Yeah, I would say, I mean, my in-laws are really great.
that's
They,
awesome.
yeah, I mean, they
I
live,
hope they're watching.
yeah, really. Hi guys. Yeah, no, they're great. They don't really give us any issues.
So you haven't really had to set boundaries and stuff? Like I know this is getting personal.
No, you're fine. Yeah, no, I don't think we've really had to. Just, I mean, Scott's, my husband, is a pretty like introverted, private person.
Mm.
So I don't know that, but yeah, I think they just kind of respect that and understand that
Nice.
you know, if basically if he says something, they would listen.
That's
So I
nice.
don't really have a
They sound well adjusted.
they
Emotionally mature.
emotionally mature,
Yeah.
but yeah, and I mean, my mom's really good about asking before she comes.
Oh, that's nice. But now you have some physical distance too, right? Because that's another
Yeah.
kind of branch of this is some in-laws will live like halfway around the world or halfway around the
Yeah.
country. And some people are right down the street.
Yeah, yep. I don't know that I could live down the street from my
Like-
family.
Like
I
your own family
well,
or
just
Scott's
in-
family?
Well, I mean, just in general, like I enjoy having kind of a distance, right? Like it's nice because then you can
You
be
miss them.
well that, but also it's very much like, okay, this is when you come and then this is when you leave, and
It's intentional.
yeah, and yeah.
I think that breeds like quality time when it's
Mhm.
intentional and like you don't take it for granted then. And like I said, you have a chance to miss them. It's more of like a thing when you see
Yeah.
them versus like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, you know, they're just there all the time. But at the same time, when talking about kids, like
Mhm.
a lot of people want their families around when they're raising children. They want the grandparents to have a role in raising the children.
Yeah.
And I mean, I imagine like super busy and like, you know, needing a break and babysitting and like that would be amazing to have
Yeah.
someone right down the street, but there are pros and cons with that.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I would say if you have in-laws down the street, to definitely make sure that you put both of you as a couple put boundaries down that make sense for you guys. So if it's like, hey, can you call or text before you come over?
Yeah.
You know, knock on the door instead of just coming in.
Oh yeah. Never even thought of that.
Well, but you know, little things. I just think of
Totally.
it makes me think again, I don't mean to put everything on TV, but it just makes me think of like Everyone Loves Raymond. I don't know
Oh
if
my
you ever watched
gosh,
it.
yes, of course.
But you know, the mother
They just walk in.
Yeah, the whole family just walks in and it's like,
Poor Deborah.
yeah, I know. Like it's a very
That's a
dysfunctional
very
family.
good example, actually. I didn't even think about them, but
Yeah,
a lot of sitcoms.
Yeah, yep. Oh yeah, you could cycle
Like we could
analyze
just go
those.
through all
You
of
just
them.
go through all of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, they just walk in and they, you know, plop down. They're in the fridge.
Yeah, they're in the fridge. They're bringing
You
over
know, they're
food,
reorganizing things and
going into their closets.
yeah, exactly. Like, you know, that you, even though it's your family, you deserve privacy.
Totally.
And so I think
I'd
that's
hope most
important.
people would get that, you know, like,
You,
wouldn't that be what they would want too? Like, wouldn't they
you
want, like, not to
know,
be intruded upon? Maybe there's a sense of entitlement, like, you're my kid and
I
therefore
think so.
I can do what I
I did
want.
have a client once who their parents helped them buy a house.
Oh, so there's a,
And so there was an element of, well, we helped you, so this is kind of our house, kind of
oh,
element.
strings attached, right? That's what people say. Is this money with strings attached? Family paying for weddings
Yeah,
and
yeah,
stuff.
exactly. Yep. And so it was very much, it was mainly the father-in-law actually who just thought he could, come into the house and come over whenever he wanted and, just like, oh, I think they also did live down the street from each
Of course they
other.
did. Of
Yeah,
course they
it's
did.
like, oh, whoa.
He just went for an afternoon walk down the street.
Yeah, hey, you
We're
walk into your
here.
kitchen
He's
in
sitting
your robe
there.
and your towel on, and he's like, "Hey, I'm getting some coffee."
Yeah.
Like I don't know if that happened, but
No,
that's
but
what I imagine. That level
totally.
of just sort of intrusion.
You know, I'd like to think that people just lack the self-awareness. Like that people maybe are just like, this is me giving people the benefit of the doubt, but just being so close that they're like, of course that like it's okay if I do this. I'm not bothering them. Like it's all good, right? Like they're not thinking, haha, I know they don't like this and I'm gonna do it anyways. Like I don't think it comes from a malicious place. It often doesn't. I
Yeah.
really don't. I think it comes from like absent-mindedness and just like not thinking about it.
I think too, it kind of comes down to nobody's ever really called them on those things.
That too.
And so it's a lot of times what I see is like, oh, somebody who sort of pushes the boundaries or sort of doesn't think like, oh, maybe they wouldn't like this. It
Right.
doesn't have anyone around them going, hey, maybe
Like
let's,
questioning what
yeah,
they're
yeah,
doing.
like they don't have a partner going like, maybe we should call first, or maybe
Right.
they wouldn't like that, like
No
nothing
one's
like that.
asking
Nobody's
themselves this
challenging
thing.
them.
Yeah.
And so as a result, they're just kind of bulldozing into
Yeah. But I
something
don't even
like,
think they're realizing that they're doing
no.
it.
And I think when you confront them, you get one of two reactions.
Well, and that's the thing is you got to make sure you're
Unfortunately.
not confronting, but maybe more so just like having a conversation.
Sure.
You never want anyone to feel attacked
Yeah.
because we know that impacts
Sure.
the end result.
Yeah, definitely.
No, totally though. But I agree with you. People are either receptive, not receptive, but they could also be hurt. Like, oh
Yeah.
my God, like guilty that like I did this and
Yeah.
holy moly, I didn't realize I was doing it. Like
Yeah.
I feel bad now.
Mhm.
It's just complex. Like we're all emotional beings, right? And so
Yeah.
we're talking about different just emotional experiences.
Mhm.
And we have to realize that we're not in control of how other people like have
Yeah.
those emotions, right? Like we can only
Mhm.
control what we do. And I know that sounds very therapy like and cliche, but it's so
No,
true just to
it's true.
remember that
Mhm.
if they respond poorly, that's on them.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well put.
Well, thank you. But yeah, it's interesting and I feel like we could talk all day about it, but we don't have all day. No.
Yeah, I think um I think we brought up a lot of good points.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of topics for future
There you go.
podcast episodes.
Yeah. Also, next time we are going to have a special guest, which I'm super excited
Yes.
for. It's my dear friend, Kelly.
Yeah.
She's a therapist and she works mainly with individuals who have had fertility issues, who are currently pregnant, or who have lost, as in miscarried, their babies. And she's working on getting a certification in EMDR. So
That's really
hopefully
cool.
kind of connecting those two things together, which is going to be really awesome to kind of
Yeah.
hear about that. It's not an area that I'm
Oh, I don't do it at all.
not
I don't know anything about
it's
it.
not an area that I'm well versed in.
No.
So we will both have quite the experience.
It's going to be a learning experience
It's
for
going to
us
be a
too.
learning experience for us both.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, that sounds good. That's a good place to leave it.
Okay.
Okay. Until next time.
Bye guys.